much from coast to coast. So we're ready to start our next session. I'm going to turn the time to John, who will introduce the session in our panel.
Thank you, Nate. I don't want to interrupt your snacking and coffee break, but we need to kind of make sure things run on time since we're supposed to have plenty of time adequately left for our breakout sessions at the conclusion of this discussion. I want to pitch a book. Matt Abbott, who's sitting right up here, everybody knows, has just published The Lawyer's Guide to Mentoring, second edition, and it is an invaluable resource. Even though you know a lot about mentoring, you're going to learn a lot from the book. I've kind of skimmed through it and taken a look at it. I'm going to buy a copy. There are forms in the lobby table out here, so make sure you don't forget to consider that, because I think you'll find it extremely helpful. Our topic is mentoring metrics. What can we learn by measuring things about the success or failure or disadvantages of our programs or the shortcomings? So since we're talking about metrics, I want to start with doing a quick survey. How many of you have actually been mentored? Just a quick show of hands. So virtually everybody. How many of you have been through a sponsorship program? Nobody. Okay, well, one. Oh, one. The sun's in my eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't see you back there. How many of you have been, when you were mentored, it was in a formally structured program, mandatory or voluntary, but it had a structure, objectives, and those kinds of things? How many was just kind of, please mentor me, or I'll mentor you, and you just kind of went with the flow? Okay. How many of you could give an elevator speech quickly about the objectives of your program? Okay, not too many. Maybe you haven't thought about that, but that's kind of when you're trying to promote the program and people are trying to get some concerns, maybe that's a valuable thing. My initial experience with metrics was when I was in another life, a chemical engineer with Procter & Gamble Company. They did an annual soap use survey every year. And they had massive amounts of resources to do this, and they measured how many times a week people bathed or took showers. And they compiled the results, and they rapidly concluded after about 2 or 3 years that the results they were getting were totally felonious. People reported taking many more baths than the total amount of soap production in the United States. So they learned very quickly that this measurement idea has got a lot more to it than just, let me throw a question out. So one more question. How many of you know about evidence-based medicine? Okay, most of us do. The idea being you go to see your doctor and your doctor is keeping up with the literature and finding out that there may be a better way to do that than what he or she's been doing, because there are all these studies and they really validated kind of risk-benefit in terms of this treatment option versus that treatment option. I don't think lawyers do that, do we? We just kind of go with the flow, and I'm thinking about professionalism standards in the profession. Many states have adopted professionalism, a code of professionalism, and said that's a great thing, we're done with that now. But we've never asked ourselves, does it work? Did it change anything? What might we do to change things? So I want to throw out the concept of maybe we should have evidence-based mentoring. And think about the idea that we need to inform ourselves constantly and over time with new ideas and new ways to assess what we're doing on the theory that there should be a continuous improvement process about mentoring. And a couple of examples. I think it's conventional wisdom that traditionally that one-on-one mentoring really is the way to go. But do we really know that? Have we really compared that scientifically or measurement-wise with mentoring circles? I don't know whether anybody's done that or not. And I don't want to downplay the difficulty of generating data and information because it's a time-consuming process. I've been involved for the last 5 years on a longitudinal study of our mentoring program in South Carolina to compare a cohort of people 5 years back before we started mentoring with a cohort who've been in practice 5 years after mentoring with disciplinary sanctions. And I kind of was surprised at the difference that our significant disciplinary sanctions have gone down with lawyers in practice 5 years or less since we have had mentoring. They're much lower than compared to the 5-year group prior to the start of mentoring. And I'm not sophisticated enough to measure or assert that mentoring caused the decline, but I will say that there is a strong correlation between mentoring, because a lot of other things have gone on in the state. But there's a correlation between the start of the mentoring program and the decline in the sanctions of new lawyers, serious sanctions, disbarment, suspension, that kind of thing. So our objective with the panel today is to, number one, just get you to think about what might you do in your programs to begin to think about how do we measure some of this stuff. And the second objective, and I hope there'll be some takeaways here, is how do you go about doing this? If you're an administrator of a mentoring program, that's a full-time job or a significant part of your time. And you don't have the time like I do to have the luxury of working at a university law school with research assistants and databases and people that can pull stuff up from all over the world and get it back to me that I can take a look at it and then have the access to university statistical offices to kind of come up with ideas and interpret what I've been finding. So I don't downplay that, but nevertheless, it's what we need to think about. We have two really superbly qualified people who know far more about this than I will ever know. Tammy Patterson is the president of the NALP Foundation, and NALP Foundation, I'm sure you know, they do an exhaustive amount of studies about the legal profession generally. They did 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a national study of mentoring. Lisa Kirby is the chief learning officer. Is that chief?
Close enough. I'm the director of research and knowledge sharing.
I love that title, Director of Research and Knowledge Sharing of the Diversity Lab, and I think you work out of Boston, is that right?
Correct.
I kept trying to reach Lisa on the phone, and every time I would call her, they were blizzarded it out every week for like a month.
Last
but anyway,
week.
yeah. So I'm going to let Tammy start with just discussing about what it is that you do, what kind of studies do you run that might be relevant to kind of assessing whether mentoring is good, bad, or indifferent, and what we can do to improve it.
Sure. Well, as John mentioned, and thank you all again, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this important conference. I have, just to give you a little bit of background, I've been with the foundation now for 10 years, and prior to that I was with a law firm in Dallas, Texas. Up until about a week ago was known as Gardier Wynn Sewell, and now in the world of mergers is Foley Gardier. But I was there for about 14 years, and one of my main tasks was professional development, and in particular establishing a mentoring program, a formal mentoring program for our firm. And I will tell you candidly that we went through a number of iterations and changes and scrapping it all together and starting over, and went without one for a while. And it was a really difficult task because I never could get my head around what was going wrong and why wasn't this working. We tried everything from one-on-one to formal, informal mentoring circles. We finally landed right before I left with what we thought was the most successful program, which was circle mentoring or mentoring teams. But when I left, I had the opportunity to move to the NALP Foundation, which does research in all aspects of lawyer careers. But one of the things that I took on fairly early in partnership with the folks at Thomson Reuters and what was then West Legal Ed Center was a national study of mentoring programs in law schools. And what we looked at we looked at a number of factors, but whether firms had formal or mentoring, formal or informal programs, what those formal programs consisted of, and in a number of other things. And I won't go through the entire study; it's available through the Now Foundation. But there's some. I wanted to kind of point out some key takeaways that I think might relate to our topic today. First of all, what we surveyed both administrators and law firms who were responsible for organizing and overseeing these programs, and then we also we surveyed the lawyers that were participating in the program. And one of the aha moments was the data that we received back when we asked the questions about, do you know what the objectives are of this program, from both sides. And what we found, there was a huge disconnect between the lawyers that were part of the program and those who were administering the program. The lawyers who were part of the program really could not detail what the objectives were. And so from that point, we then kind of looked at, well, was there training? Was there any type of training involved in these programs within these firms? And what we found is that more than not, there wasn't training going on. So, that's one of the things where I think metrics really brought out, highlighted the fact that there is this disconnect, and to be able to really bring that program together in a more productive way and have it be successful, you've got to explain to both parties what we're trying to accomplish here and what the objectives are for this program. Another interesting piece that came out of this study was that while firms had, or the firms that did have formal programs where they assigned someone a mentor, or the mentor could choose someone from a group, we saw that a little over half of the mentees told us that while they had someone in this formal program, the person that they considered to be their primary mentor, who they went to on a more regular basis, was not that person that was part of the formal mentor program. So found that to be quite interesting as well. And so one of the things I think we have tried to do along the way is kind of get to the bottom of that. And a lot of that has to do with really tracking who's going to be best with, who's going to be suited, and again, what the objectives are, and making sure both parties understand and that they're trained appropriately so that they know how to address all the needs of the mentor and be there when needed and that type of thing. Another study that I would mention that was started long before I joined the foundation, but I hope maybe some of you have heard of a study called After the JD. I know David Wilkins was one of our speakers last night, and David was a key researcher on that project, and that's a longitudinal study that started probably now 16 years ago. We tracked graduates from the class of 2000 for about 13 years and 3 different touch points in their careers. And we looked at all different things like mobility and job choices and law school debt and those types of things and how they impacted the career choices. But a small portion of that dealt with mentoring. And I wanted to mention one key finding that came out of that, and that was the significance and the power of a one-on-one lunch or a one-on-one meeting outside of the realm of employment. So just the actions of a mentor and a mentee getting together and talking about something other than work, and how that in finding things in common with each other outside of work, what an impact that had on the lawyers in this study and their overall career satisfaction. And in particular, we found that it had a dramatic impact, positive impact on lawyers of color when that type of thing occurred. And it sounds really simple, but there really is an immense power behind just a lunch and just talking about something other than work and finding out what you do, what your hobbies are and those types of things, and starting that connection. So that's those two things. We also have right now an ongoing study that we are doing with the University of Maryland and George Mason, their sociology departments in the undergrad section of the school. While I don't have the findings yet, as it is ongoing, one of the things that we are looking at is age disparity in mentoring. So a lot of times there is a big age gap between the mentor and the mentee, and as you all know, there can also be huge gaps in communication styles and preferences. And so what this study is trying to evaluate and to look at is, you know, how significant are these age gaps, and are they affecting the relationship in a positive or negative way? And then built into the study, there are also 2 exercises that happen at different time points. There's 2 different surveys and there's 2 different exercises. And the exercises are designed to help bridge that age gap. So talking to both parties about how, you know, email and texting is much more preferred for new associates, most likely, and that's not, you know, wasn't how the partners in a lot of firms or senior associates were used to communicating. So it's trying to bring those 2 parties together and kind of bridge that gap in communication style that exists today, and I think that is a big challenge when it comes to mentoring. So stay tuned for our results on that. I think they will probably be out a later part of this year, but we have I think right now somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 mentor-mentee pairs. So law firms kind of nominated or suggested, if you will, pairs within their firms to participate in the study. So we should have results from that, and I think they'll be really interesting. One of the first part of the study was taken before the exercise, and then the second half of the survey was taken after the exercises were
Let me
completed.
ask you a quick follow-up question here. This is going to sound strange, but with regard to mentoring, do we know what we don't know, or we don't know what we don't know? And the reason I get that is you're talking about communication style. I mean, why did you choose that particular thing to try to measure? Or did you just thought you would do it, or is there other data to suggest?
Well, I think there's a lot of data around generational differences and generational preferences when it comes to communication. And so that really was the basis for this study, to see if some of the issues and the challenges that we encounter with mentoring and mentoring programs might actually be related to generational differences and preferences.
Okay,
So
so
that's
this-
what we're trying to
This would be,
correlate.
your opinion, this would be something useful for the state of South Carolina mentoring program with the Georgia, I don't know when Michelle West is here today, but the Georgia program, that's the kind of thing that would be useful to explore in terms of how to improve the program.
Exactly, yes. And so that's what we're trying to uncover is there in fact, is that hindering the success of a relationship or a program? And if it is, what can we do to help that along? And these exercises, I think, and the fact that we're surveying before and after the exercises occur, we're hoping that will give us some data that will suggest this actually does help.
And one additional follow-up question, because your experience at Gardere, that you said that you tried one-on-one, but you found that mentoring groups or circles work better.
Mm-hmm.
You think you can generalize that? Is that scalable across all mentoring programs? Or
I
would
don't
you
know.
say that?
I think within a law firm, and again, it depends on the law firm and the size. We were a mid-sized firm, so this worked pretty well. But what we found is giving new lawyers the opportunity to go to different people for different things was helpful. They wouldn't always go to someone in their practice group if they were having a practice-related problem, or if maybe they were having some type of communication issue with the client. They wouldn't go to the partner whose client that belonged to. they liked going to someone else who they felt like maybe had been in that position before. So we were finding just outside of our formal program when it was one-on-one that they were going to different people, even though they weren't mentors, for different reasons. And so we set up circles that included 2 partners, 2 senior associates, 2 mid-level associates, and 2 new associates. And they were from different practice groups and different experience levels. And so really it ended up being a little bit of, mentoring for folks in the circle other than just the 2 newest lawyers.
One final question. I want to get to Lisa. Would you advise people involved with very large programs like the Georgia program or the South Carolina program, running 5, Oregon, Washington, 500, 600, 1,000 lawyers a year, to do a serious reevaluation of the success of the program, what's working, what's not working, every 5 years or whatever the case may be? I don't know that anybody's doing that.
Yeah, I absolutely would. I mean, I think that, when we tackled this study early on to look at mentoring programs in law firms, we really uncovered a number of factors that showed what a disconnection there was between the program and its objectives and what the participants felt about it. And so, and whether or not, and a lot of times those types of reassessments can just pull out one thing, one little tweak that may make a world of difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's extremely important to really evaluate and get candid opinions. And I will tell you the power of quantitative information is fantastic and the data is great. But to be able to sit in a room with 4 or 5 or 6 people that are involved in your mentor program and get that one-on-one feedback is really, really valuable. A lot of times, I think we have found that people are more open to talk about something in that type of setting, a focus group or a round table, because someone will say something and they'll say, they'll think, oh yeah, well I remember that kind of happened to me too, and then they open up about it. So that can be a really powerful tool
and
as well.
And that's really cost effective. You don't have to do a massive survey.
Exactly.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Lisa, talk about what you're working on. You're doing some fascinating stuff with the Diversity Lab.
Sure. So I just wanted to mention first, just touching on metrics generally, 2 things that I think that have prevented metrics from being really successfully integrated into a lot of programs in our profession. And I should mention I'm a recovering lawyer, and I've worked in talent in law firms as well before joining Diversity Lab, but are that, one, I think the concept of data collection across any sort of talent program just doesn't have as much appeal as the sort of more exciting, glamorous elements of it, the bells and whistles. And so I think what often tends to happen is that programs are launched with a lot of excitement and fanfare and slogans and buzzwords, but the sort of back office piece isn't thought through as carefully from the beginning. There's going to be some sort of feedback element, but it's not necessarily an integral part of the program's functioning itself. And I think that it tends to fall to the wayside, and then that leads to a little bit of program fatigue and diversity inclusion. You hear about diversity fatigue because people think, well, we do all these big programs, we never know what quite happens to them. They sort of tend to fizzle out often. You don't quite hear the same buzzwords after a period of time. There's a bit of a netherworld that sometimes these things drift into because there's a lack of accountability, and I think because of the lack of the grounding in metrics. And the other thing I thought of that I wanted to mention is that I think the idea of metrics has sort of this mystique to it where people think they need to buy a fancy software or bring in a consultant or have some sort of data analyst, but it's really extremely simple. It's just the idea of having goals and measuring progress against the goals, and it can be super low tech, it can be a really low hanging fruit, but I think that there's sort of this industry now, but there's a lot that you can do even from a really basic perspective. You can have a no-tack approach and still be doing metrics, but I think the key is to think it through as you're developing a program, whether it's mentoring or any other sort of talent-focused or diversity program. But so one way that we're doing that is we have a program called On Track for Sponsorship at Diversity Lab, and Ida was a key advisor to us as we kind of got this off the ground. This was an idea that came out of the Women in Law Hackathon, which Ida was also an expert advisor in. It was a program where we brought together 54 law firm partners at Stanford Law School in 2016 to hack new solutions to gender equity in the law. And one of the ideas eventually became the On Track for Sponsorship program. So it's not mentoring, but it's close enough, and it functions pretty similarly to how a mentoring program would. There are a few elements that I think relate to how we incorporated metrics from the beginning, and I think of them sort of as checklists, community, and accountability. So people know about the Checklist Manifesto book. It found that just simply having a list of steps right in front of you can help people stay on track with respect to even complex tasks. So surgeons, pilots, checklists lead to great success, and it's because having a reminder of the steps and then also instilling in discipline that leads to higher success. So checklists. Our On Track for Sponsorship program is a team-based mentoring program. So it's sort of similar to the idea of a mentoring circle. One thing we found is that sponsorship and mentoring programs can tend to fizzle out based on one individual scheduling difficulty. So the partner goes to trial, things kind of fall apart, and it never quite gets back on track. When you have a team, that helps smooth over some of these scheduling irregularities that can happen from person to person. So the program is designed for two constituencies. It's to either get senior associates over the hump to making partner, being elevated to partner, and then newly promoted partners to position them for leadership positions within their firm. So there's a team that consists of a practice area partner, a management committee sponsor, an external coach, and a client coach. So that combination works in concert, and so the checklist element is that the protege has to develop their goals in advance, and these are all listed on a tech platform. I should have brought screenshots with me, but you can see the goals right in front of you every day when you log onto this platform, and so can all the rest of your team. And you measure progress against your goals by you can click buttons that say in progress, completed, and then your sponsors opt in to help you with the goals by publicly sort of committing. Their little picture appears next to the goal, and everyone can see that they're in to the goal. So that leads me to sort of the community piece that I mentioned. So checklists, and then the community. You have the team that is all working together to achieve a common goal. You also have the community, the larger community within the firm that is participating in the program. Everyone can see on this tech platform there is a leaderboard. So you earn points by making progress towards your goals. And so there will be different teams. There will be Tammy's team, there's John's team, there's Ida's team, and you can see how those are all listed. And, oh, Ida's pulling ahead because she met 3 goals, and then there's a little bit of a competition, and that brings me to accountability. So you have the checklist, you have the community, and then the accountability piece is that everyone can see your progress, you have the points built in, and that's sort of the accountability that keeps everyone on track towards the goals that they're trying to meet. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention quickly was the Mansfield rule, which was another of our initiatives that was an idea coming out of the hackathon that we held in 2016. And it's not mentoring focused, but I wanted to mention it just as another illustration of how metrics should be incorporated from the beginning to ensure sort of its sustainability and accountability. So the idea of the Mansfield rule is that firms commit to considering at least 30% women and minorities for specified leadership positions. So there you have your checklist. It's very simple. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. Like Tammy was saying, just the power of having a lunch. It sounds really simple and basic, but it's incredibly powerful. I think sometimes things that are really simple tend to be overlooked when people are searching for some great, innovative idea that's going to use fancy technology and requires experts, but actually the simplicity of the Mansfield rule, 30%, everyone gets it. It's extremely easy to explain. And there's a lot underneath it. There's a lot more that goes into actually making it work, but it's really easy to explain, and a lot of the firms have told us that, and so that's the checklist piece, and people have said that their conversations at their firm about leadership, succession planning, partnership promotions have been radically different. All these firms are committed to diversity and inclusion, and they kind of wanted to make progress, but it was hard to, they didn't have any specific construct or mechanism to grab onto. Having this 30% checklist, it helps clarify their conversations. It's a construct for them to work through when they're talking about who's going to be the next management committee member or who will be on the compensation committee. It's just something that keeps them on track. And of course you have the accountability because they committed to adopting the rule. At the end, if they're Mansfield certified, so if they've successfully done this, they'll be able to send newly promoted diverse partners to a client forum. So they're accountable to the clients in the end. And of course you have the community. Again, all of these elements would be transferable to any sort of program. We wanted to develop a knowledge sharing community to build on the momentum of the hackathon. So we hold monthly knowledge sharing calls with our participating firms. These are opportunities to share best practices and lessons learned, and sometimes we bring in experts. So there's that aspect, the sense that you're participating in a larger cohort and kind of moving forward together to achieve a specified goal. One thing that I always, when I was in talent at a firm, there was this one partner on the diversity committee that I worked with who would always say, well, we tried something like that a couple of years ago and it just didn't really work out, so let's not go in that direction. And you just never quite knew what exactly had been tried, what about it didn't work, or what was there any part that did work, who was it tried with? And there's no way to compare or say, well, could you have tweaked one thing and made a little bit more progress? None of this was kept track of. It just wasn't a priority. They had the programs and their intentions were good, but there weren't really any metrics. I just wanted to amplify the point that Tammy made about qualitative metrics. For the Mansfield Rule, one thing we've been doing, back to the Mansfield Rule, is surveys and then in sort of live check-ins. And we've gotten really valuable data from both. I think sometimes, as I said, I think that lawyers shy away from data or thinking that they think that metrics is just boiling everything down to a number, and that, of course you can't sum up what's happening just on by listing a bunch of stats. But for example, in the Mansfield Rule, I can tell you now that 95% of firms are having formal discussions of including women minorities and when they're talking about promotions to management committee, and they were not doing that in the past. So I think metrics like that can be really helpful. It's also a way of measuring progress as you go. I can't say right now, well, all our participating firms have 30% women and minorities in leadership roles. That would be silly, and that's not, you can't boil it all down to that, but you can look at the progress you're making along the way, and there's ways to create measurements as you go, but it's something you have to be really intentional about. It really shouldn't be an afterthought like, oh, well, let's just do a feedback survey at the end, and I think it's best to actually do it real time. I don't think it's as useful to do it on an annual basis or every few years. I think having metrics, collecting them right from the beginning, midway, and looking at outcomes at the end is probably the best way to do it. And again, it doesn't have to be a really high tech. You can use SurveyMonkey or one of these tools that's out there that are free.
Can I ask two follow-up questions? Where did the name Mansfield come from?
Yes, great question. It was, they're named after the first woman to be admitted to the practice of law in the United States, Arabella Mansfield. She took the bar. I think she had to take it illegally. Women weren't allowed to take it, but she did take it and passed. And it also, the slogan of the team at the hackathon came up with that was, make law more than just a Mansfield, adopt a Mansfield. So it worked out well.
And what is a hackathon?
Oh, so a hackathon is a concept that came from the tech industry where I think it still happens, but hackers would get together, sort of tech coder people would get together for a period of like 24 hours and with their computers all in a room and hack out some solutions to technological problems. And it's been expanded to other industries, and I think our hackathon was the first hackathon in the legal profession, the Women in Law Hackathon. We're now running a different hackathon series, the Diversity in Law Hackathon. We launched at Harvard Law School in February. And so the idea that we had was, we've been doing a lot of these initiatives for years. We haven't seen a lot of progress in terms of diversity and inclusion. The numbers haven't changed much in the last 20 years or so. Let's borrow a concept from another industry and attack it differently. We have so many great minds in our firms and law schools and legal departments. Let's bring them together and have them tackle this. And the side benefit of it was that we brought all these partners together who are leaders in their firm, as Ida knows, and they learned a lot about diversity and inclusion along the way. So they were hacking the solution while also simultaneously we were educating them on the back end. So
That's very interesting. We're about running out of time, and I'm sure I'll jump up and say quit in about 2 minutes. But I want to try to sum up here. Am I off base or am I on base about saying, number one, you have to know really know and communicate what the objectives of your mentoring program are. You need to kind of constantly be thinking about ways to measure whether or not you're meeting your objectives and what the problems are. And number three, it doesn't have to be that complicated or expensive, that focus groups or one-on-one surveys or these online surveys that are available without charge can be effective ways to do this. And if you can combine all that with some technology that our last panel talked about, you really can figure out good ways to learn more and improve your program. Is that okay?
I think that's absolutely correct. And, I think that however you choose to track progress and success, just is do it, in some way, and to record it in some way, because a lot of times I think the power to make a change or power to shift in another direction or, sometimes comes from a higher, power. So in a law firm, it might come from, a management committee or to make a significant change where the firm's going to devote more resources or the law school is going to devote more resources. So you have to have something that can back up the reason for the change. So however you decide to track progress and success, you have to record it in some form or fashion so that you can show some historical, some trend information, and even to the extent that, you can get your hands on any type of benchmark data that's out there where you can benchmark your progress or programs against other law schools or other firms, to the extent that that's out there and be able to compare is very, very powerful, as we know, coming from the law firm side. We always want to do what the other firm is doing that sounds good, and if everybody's doing something and we're not, oh my gosh, how quickly can we start doing this? So the power of benchmarking data and trend information is really, really key.
One interesting but probably useless fact. When I started looking at some of the data about our mentoring program here in South Carolina, I got my student assistant to compile every bibliography of all the mentoring studies everywhere in the main university library. He found about 1,000 articles and studies using metrics. 5 were about law firms. So we're not doing anywhere near what everybody else is doing. But there's a lot of useful information out there that is transferable, and we need to be thinking about that. So the moral of this story is just go do it. Get after it and improve things. It's about us, and that's kind of what David Wilkins was saying last night. Anybody?